Jessica Hills had exactly 3 rules for surviving corporate hell. Never sleep with a colleague, never let them see you sweat, and never, under any circumstances, let Moojin Park get under her skin. She was currently failing at all 3. "You're staring at the Kong report like it personally offended your ancestors," came that insufferably smooth voice from behind her cubicle wall. Korean accent wrapped around perfect English, designed specifically to irritate her last nerve. Jessica didn't look up from her laptop. "And you're breathing loudly enough to disturb mine. What's your point, Park?" "My point," Moojin said, and she could hear the smirk in his voice without even seeing his face, "is that you've been on the same page for 15 minutes. Either you've discovered the secret to time travel hidden in quarterly sales figures, or you're distracted." Her fingers stilled on the keyboard. Damn him for being observant. Damn him for being right. She spun her chair around to find him leaning against her cubicle entrance, arms crossed over a charcoal Tom Ford suit that fit him like a second skin. His dark hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place, and his expression held that particular combination of amusement and challenge that made her want to either slap him or...
No.
Absolutely not. "I'm working," she said flatly. "You know, that thing we're both paid to do? Or have you finally decided to coast on those cheekbones and let the rest of us carry the load?" His grin widened. "My cheekbones are carrying plenty, Hills. Ask anyone in marketing. Your humility is truly inspiring. I learned from the best." He tilted his head, eyes glinting. "Oh, wait, no, you don't do humility, do you? My mistake." Jessica stood, smoothing down her burgundy pencil skirt with deliberate calm. At 5'9", she could almost meet his eyes without craning her neck. Almost. She took a single step forward, close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne, something expensive and woody that she absolutely did not notice. "Here's some advice, Park. Save the charm offensive for someone who's impressed by it. I've got actual work to do." "Funny," he said, not moving an inch despite her proximity. "I was about to say the same thing. But if you need help with the Kong report, just ask. I finished mine yesterday." Of course he did. "I'll pass," she said sweetly. "I prefer accuracy over speed. And I prefer both. It's called efficiency. It's called cutting corners. It's called being better at the job." The air between them crackled with a familiar hostility that had defined their relationship for the past 18 months, ever since senior management had announced that one of them would be promoted to supervising manager by quarter's end. The position came with a corner office, a 40% salary increase, and control over the entire East Asia division. Jessica wanted it more than she'd wanted anything in her professional life. And Moojin Park was the only thing standing in her way. "Better at the job," she repeated slowly, letting each word drip with disdain. "Is that what you tell yourself when you schmooze clients at overpriced restaurants while I'm actually building sustainable strategies?" Schmoozing is relationship building, Hills. But I wouldn't expect you to understand the concept. You'd have to be capable of forming actual human connections first. The dig landed harder than she'd ever admit. She knew what people said about her, Ice Queen. Cold. All business, no warmth. It didn't matter that she'd clawed her way up from an entry-level position in 3 years, or that her retention rates were the highest in the company, or that clients specifically requested her for their accounts. All that mattered was that she wasn't likable the way Moojin Park was likable. "At least my connections are based on competence," she shot back. "Not on being the office eye candy." Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify, before his expression smoothed back into that infuriating smirk. "Jealous, Hills? Of what?" "Your fragile ego. Of the fact that I can do the job and make people actually enjoy working with me." "Enjoy working with you?" Jessica laughed, sharp and bitter. "They tolerate you, Park. There's a difference. You're like expensive champagne, looks good, tastes good, but ultimately just empty bubbles." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Point to her." "And you're like cheap coffee," he said quietly, stepping even closer. Now, they were definitely in each other's personal space, close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to maintain eye contact. Strong, bitter, and gives people headaches. But I guess some people develop a taste for that. Her heart was pounding, from anger, obviously. Just anger. Nothing to do with how his eyes had gone dark and intense, or how she could feel the heat radiating from his body, or how his gaze had dropped to her mouth for just a fraction of a second. Get out of my cubicle, Park. Make me Hills. For one insane moment, she genuinely considered it. Considered closing the last few inches between them and finding out if his mouth was as insufferable as his personality, if kissing him would be as intense as fighting with him, if all this hostility could translate into something else entirely. Then reality crashed back in. I have work to do, she said, stepping back and breaking whatever spell had momentarily gripped them both. And apparently, so do you, since you have time to waste annoying me. Moojin studied her for a long moment, expression unreadable. Then he pushed off from the cubicle wall and straightened his jacket. See you at the presentation tomorrow, Hills. May the best candidate win. I intend to. He walked away, and Jessica dropped back into her chair, pressing her palms against her eyes and trying to slow her racing pulse. This promotion couldn't come fast enough. Because the alternative, spending months more in this toxic dance with Moojin Park, was going to kill her. Or worse, it was going to make her do something phenomenally stupid. The presentation room felt like a pressure cooker. Jessica stood at the front, her laser pointer tracing across the projection screen as she walked the executive team through her Q3 strategy proposal. Every word was practiced, every slide meticulously designed. She'd rehearsed this 17 times in her apartment, timing it down to the second. As you can see from the demographic breakdown, she said, clicking to the next slide, our current approach to the Seoul market is leaving significant revenue on the table. By restructuring our client outreach and implementing targeted digital campaigns, we can increase market penetration by at least 32% within 6 months. Mr. Choi, the CEO, leaned forward in his chair. Those are ambitious numbers, Ms. Hills. They're realistic numbers, sir, based on comprehensive market analysis and consumer behavior patterns. She clicked again, bringing up a graph that she'd spent 2 weeks perfecting. I've accounted for seasonal fluctuations, competitor movement, and economic variables. Conservative estimates still put us at 28% growth. She could feel Moojin's eyes on her from where he sat in the back row, waiting for his turn. She refused to look at him, refused to acknowledge the way her skin prickled with awareness of his presence. Impressive work, said Sandra Martinez, the CFO. What's your implementation timeline? Jessica smiled. This was the part she'd been waiting for. I can have the preliminary team assembled within 2 weeks. Full deployment by end of quarter. And the budget? 15% under what we allocated for the Tokyo expansion last year, with projected returns triple that campaign's performance. She saw Mr. Choi exchange glances with Sandra. Good glances. Impressed glances. Thank you, Ms. Hills. Mr. Park, you're up. Jessica gathered her materials and moved to take a seat, passing Moojin as he stood. Their shoulders brushed, barely, just a whisper of contact, and electricity shot down her arm. His cologne hit her again, and she hated that she recognized it now, hated that some traitorous part of her brain had apparently memorized it. Knock 'em dead, she muttered, low enough that only he could hear. Already planning to, he murmured back, and there was something in his voice that made her stomach flip. She sat down and watched him take command of the room. And damn it, he was good. Where Jessica had been precise and data-driven, Moojin was dynamic and persuasive. He moved around the space like he owned it, his gestures confident, his smile disarming. He told stories about client relationships, painted vivid pictures of market opportunities, made the executives laugh at carefully timed moments. His proposal was different from hers, focused more on relationship building and brand presence than pure market analysis, but it was solid. Annoyingly solid. The numbers matter, Moojin said, advancing his slides with practiced ease. But in the Asian market, relationships matter more. Trust matters more. Face matters more. My approach builds long-term partnerships that create sustainable growth, not just quarterly spikes. Was that a dig at her presentation? Jessica's fingers curled into fists on her lap. You can't quantify loyalty, he continued, but you can cultivate it. And loyal clients don't just stay, they expand, they refer, they become brand ambassadors. That's the difference between good business and great business. Mr. Choi was nodding. So was Sandra. Jessica felt something cold settle in her chest. The presentation she'd spent weeks perfecting suddenly felt clinical, impersonal. She'd brought facts and figures. Moojin was bringing vision. Thank you, Mr. Park, Mr. Choi said when Moojin finished. Both presentations were excellent. We'll need time to deliberate. Of course, sir, Moojin said smoothly. Take all the time you need. The meeting adjourned, and Jessica bolted for the door, needing air, needing space, needing to not be in the same room where Moojin Park had just possibly stolen her promotion out from under her. She made it halfway down the hall before she heard footsteps behind her. Hills, wait. She didn't stop, didn't turn around, just kept walking toward the bathroom at the end of the corridor, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. Jessica. Her first name. He never used her first name. That's what made her stop. Jessica turned slowly, finding Moojin standing 3 feet away, his expression unreadable. What? The word came out harsher than she intended. He ran a hand through his hair, the first crack in his perfect composure she'd seen all day. That was, your presentation was really good. She blinked. Excuse me? Your data. The sole market analysis. It was thorough. He shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable. Really thorough. Jessica stared at him, waiting for the punchline, the subtle insult wrapped in compliment. But his face remained serious. Are you feeling all right, Park? Did you hit your head on the way out? I'm trying to be professional here. No, you're trying to psych me out. It won't work. She turned back toward the bathroom. I have actual work to do. Jessica. Stop calling me that. She pushed through the bathroom door, letting it swing shut behind her. The sudden silence was a relief. She moved to the sink, gripping the cool porcelain edge and staring at her reflection. Her makeup was still perfect, her hair still smoothly pinned. But her eyes looked tired. She needed to change and get out of here. Needed to go home, pour a large glass of wine, and forget that Moojin Park's presentation had been as good as it was. Jessica grabbed her gym bag from the corner where she'd stashed it earlier. She'd planned to change into something more comfortable before heading home. The building would be nearly empty now, everyone rushing out at 5 o'clock like the place was on fire. She pulled off her blazer, hanging it carefully on the hook, then reached back to unzip her skirt. The door opened. Occupied, she called out, not looking up. Footsteps. Wrong footsteps. Too heavy. Jessica's head snapped up, and in the mirror's reflection, she saw Moojin Park standing frozen in the doorway, his shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest, revealing smooth golden skin and the defined lines of his abdomen. His tie hung loose around his neck. Their eyes met in the mirror. Time stopped. He'd clearly had the same idea, changing before going home. His gym bag hung from one shoulder, his blazer already removed. And now they were both here, in a state of partial undress, staring at each other like deer caught in headlights. Moojin started. This is the women's bathroom, Jessica said, her voice coming out strangled. She couldn't look away from the reflection. Couldn't stop noticing the way his chest rose and fell with his breathing, the sharp cut of his collarbones, the lean muscle of his torso. The men's room has a broken lock, he said, not moving. His eyes were dark, intense, tracking down her reflection from her face to her bare shoulders. She'd already removed her blouse, standing there in just her skirt and black lace bra. Heat flooded her cheeks. So, You thought you'd just walk into the women's room? I thought everyone had left. His voice had gone lower, rougher. I didn't think, clearly. But neither of them moved. Neither reached for their clothes, or rushed to cover themselves, or backed toward the door. They just stood there, frozen in this impossible moment, seeing each other in a way they'd never been meant to. Jessica watched his throat work as he swallowed. Watched his fingers tighten on the strap of his gym bag. Watched his chest rise with a deep breath. I should go, he said. Yes. He didn't move. Neither did she. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere, a pipe dripped. Jessica's heart hammered so loudly, she was certain he could hear it. Your presentation really was good, Mujin said quietly, his eyes still locked on hers in the mirror. I meant that. I know, she whispered. And somehow, impossibly, she did. He nodded once, then finally, turned and walked out, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft click. Jessica released a breath she had known she was holding and collapsed against the sink. What the hell was that? And why couldn't she stop seeing the image of his unbuttoned shirt burned into her mind? Jessica couldn't concentrate. 3 days had passed since the bathroom incident. She refused to call it anything else, and she couldn't get the image out of her head. Mujin's shirt hanging open. The smooth expanse of his chest. The way his eyes had darkened when he saw her standing there in her bra. She'd replayed the moment 1,000 times, analyzed it from every angle, and come to exactly 0 useful conclusions except that she was apparently losing her mind. Hills, you're staring at your screen again. She jumped, nearly knocking over her coffee mug. Mujin stood beside her desk, holding a file folder, his expression carefully neutral. But there was something different in his eyes now. Something aware. I'm working, she said automatically.
Right.
Working. He set the folder down on her desk. Choi wants us to collaborate on the Kim Industries account. Said it would be good practice for whoever gets the promotion. Jessica's stomach dropped. Collaborate. As in, work together? Unless you know another definition of the word. She stared at the folder like it might bite her. Working with Mujin meant meetings.
Proximity.
Hours of forced interaction while pretending that nothing had changed, that she couldn't still see him half-dressed every time she closed her eyes. There has to be someone else. There isn't. Mujin's jaw was tight. Believe me, I already asked. So he didn't want this either.
Good.
That was good. Totally good. Fine, Jessica said, opening the folder with more force than necessary. When do we start?
Tonight.
We're already behind schedule. Of course they were. By 8 p.m., the office was deserted except for the two of them, hunched over Jessica's desk with spreadsheets and market reports scattered everywhere. They'd been working in tense silence for 2 hours, speaking only when absolutely necessary. The pricing structure doesn't make sense, Mujin said, pointing at a column of figures. Kim Industries is price-sensitive. If we go in at this rate, they'll walk. Those rates are industry standard, Jessica countered. If we undercut ourselves, we set a precedent we can't recover from. It's not undercutting, it's strategic positioning. You have to think long-term. I am thinking long-term. Long-term means not devaluing our services. Mujin sat back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. In the dim office lighting, he looked tired. Human. The top button of his shirt was undone, his tie discarded hours ago, sleeves rolled up to reveal his forearms. Jessica looked away quickly. We're not going to agree on this, he said. We don't agree on anything. That's not true. His voice was quiet. Your sole market analysis. I agreed with that. She glanced at him, surprised. You're just saying that. I'm not. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for once his expression held no trace of his usual smugness. You're brilliant at what you do, Jessica. The data work, the strategy. I've always known that. Her name again. From his lips. It sounded different than when anyone else said it.
Softer.
More intimate. Then why do you give me so much hell? She asked before she could stop herself. Moojin's laugh was bitter. Why do you think? The air between them shifted, charged with something dangerous. Jessica's pulse quickened. We should get back to work, she said, but her voice came out breathless.
Yeah.
But he didn't move. Neither did she. The silence stretched, heavy with everything they weren't saying. Jessica became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how empty the office was, how the only sound was their breathing and the hum of her computer. I can't stop thinking about it, Moojin said suddenly. Her heart stopped. What? The bathroom.
Seeing you.
His eyes met hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. I know I should apologize, but I can't make myself mean it. Jessica should shut this down. Should make some cutting remark and rebuild the walls between them. Should remember that they were competitors, that she couldn't afford this complication. Instead, she whispered, I can't stop thinking about it either. Something flared in his expression, triumph, desire, relief, all mixed together. He shifted closer, and she could smell his cologne again, could feel the heat of him. This is a terrible idea, she said. The worst, he agreed. We hate each other. Absolutely. I'm not going to let you in the promotion. Wouldn't dream of asking you to. His hand came up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Jessica's eyes fluttered closed. Tell me to stop, Moojin murmured. She should. She absolutely should. I need to use the bathroom, she said instead, standing abruptly. Confusion flickered across his face. What? Jessica walked toward the hallway, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. At the bathroom door, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. Moojin was still sitting at her desk, watching her with those dark, intense eyes. Their gazes locked. Understanding dawned on his face. Jessica pushed open the bathroom door and stepped inside, leaving it unlocked. Her hands were shaking as she gripped the edge of the sink, staring at her reflection. This was insane, reckless, completely unprofessional. She heard the bathroom door open behind her. Footsteps.
Closer this time.
Deliberate. She met Moojin's eyes in the mirror, just like 3 days ago, except this time neither of them was surprised. This time, they both knew exactly what they were doing. He stopped directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, but not quite touching. The tension was unbearable. Last chance to change your mind, he said, his voice rough. Jessica turned around to face him. Shut up and kiss me, Park. His mouth crashed into hers. The kiss was everything their rivalry had been, fierce, competitive, all-consuming. Moojin's hands came up to frame her face as he backed her against the sink, his mouth demanding and hungry. Jessica gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, pouring 3 years of frustration and tension into the kiss. When she bit his bottom lip, he groaned against her mouth, and the sound sent heat spiraling through her entire body. I hate you, she gasped when they broke apart for air. I know, he murmured against her jaw, trailing kisses down her neck. I hate you too. His hands slid down to her waist, pulling her flesh against him, and Jessica's head fell back against the mirror. This was madness. They were in the office bathroom, for God's sake, where anyone could walk in, where they could get fired, where... Moojin's mouth found the sensitive spot below her ear, and all rational thought evaporated. She pulled his face back to hers, kissing him with a desperation that should have terrified her. His lips were softer than she'd imagined, his touch both gentle and possessive. When his tongue swept against hers, she made a sound she'd never heard herself make before. Jessica, he breathed, and her name had never sounded like that, like a prayer, like a curse, like everything. Her fingers found the buttons of his shirt, fumbling with them urgently. She needed to touch him, needed to feel the skin she'd only glimpsed in the mirror 3 days ago. Moojin's hands were equally impatient, sliding up her sides, his thumbs brushing the underside of her breasts through her blouse. Then his phone buzzed. They froze, breathing hard, staring at each other with wide eyes. It buzzed again.
And again.
"Ignore it," Jessica whispered. But the spell was broken. Reality came crashing back. The fluorescent lights, the clinical white tiles, the fact that they were making out in a bathroom like teenagers instead of professional adults competing for the same promotion. Mujin stepped back, running a hand through his thoroughly disheveled hair. His lips were swollen, his shirt half unbuttoned again, and the look in his eyes was wild. "We can't," he started. "I know. This doesn't change anything." "Of course not." Jessica's voice was steadier than she felt. She smoothed down her blouse with shaking hands. "We both still want the promotion."
"Yeah."
But he was looking at her mouth like he wanted to kiss her again. "This was just stress relief," she said, not believing it for a second.
"Right."
Tension. He took another step back, putting more distance between them. "It doesn't mean anything." "Nothing at all." They stood there in silence, both knowing they were lying. Mujin's phone buzzed again, insistent. He finally pulled it out, glancing at the screen. His expression changed instantly, all the heat draining away, replaced by sharp professionalism. "It's Choi," he said. "He wants to see us both. First thing tomorrow morning." Jessica's stomach dropped. "Both of us." His office. 8 a.m. sharp. Mujin looked up from his phone, and she saw her own anxiety reflected in his eyes. He's making his decision. The promotion. The whole reason they'd been fighting for 18 months. The thing that had defined their entire relationship until approximately 10 minutes ago when they'd crossed a line they could never uncross. "Tomorrow," Jessica repeated, her mind racing. One of them was about to become the other's boss. One of them was about to win everything they'd worked for. One of them was about to lose. And they'd just kissed each other senseless in the office bathroom. "We should go," Mujin said quietly. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's important."
"Yeah."
But neither of them moved toward the door. They just stood there, looking at each other, the weight of what they'd done and what was coming hanging heavy in the air between them. "May the best candidate win," Mujin finally said, but his voice lacked its usual competitive edge. Jessica nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They left the bathroom separately, like criminals fleeing a crime scene. Jessica didn't sleep at all that night. The walk to Mr. Choi's office felt like a death march. Jessica had changed her outfit 3 times that morning, finally settling on a navy power suit that made her feel armored. Professional. Untouchable. She'd covered the dark circles under her eyes with concealer and painted her lips a bold red, war paint. In the elevator, she stood as far from Mujin as possible. He looked immaculate as always, charcoal suit pressed to perfection, hair styled flawlessly. But she noticed the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched. He hadn't slept either. Their eyes met briefly in the polished steel doors, and the memory of last night crashed over her, his hands on her waist, his mouth on her neck, the desperate way they'd reached for each other. Jessica looked away first. The elevator doors opened, and they walked in silence down the executive corridor. Sandra Martinez was already in Choi's office, visible through the glass walls. This was it, the decision that would define both their careers and possibly destroy whatever had ignited between them last night. Hills.
Park.
"Come in." Mr. Choi gestured to the chairs across from his massive desk. "Sit." They sat, careful not to let their arms touch on the shared armrest. Jessica folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "I'm going to cut right to it," Choi said, leaning back in his leather chair. "You've both impressed us tremendously over the past 18 months. Your work ethic, your results, your dedication to this company, it's been exemplary." Jessica's heart was hammering. She felt Mujin shift slightly beside her. "The decision wasn't easy," Sandra added, her expression unreadable. "You both brought different strengths to the table." Jessica, your analytical approach and strategic planning are second to none. Moojin, your relationship building and market intuition are exceptional. Past tense. They were speaking in past tense. However, Choi continued, steepling his fingers, we can only promote one of you to supervising manager. The silence stretched impossibly long. Jessica couldn't breathe.
Couldn't think.
Everything she'd worked for came down to this moment. She felt Moojin's pinky finger brush against hers on the armrest. So subtle, she might have imagined it. But when she glanced sideways, his eyes were straight ahead, his expression carved from stone. It wasn't her imagination. After careful consideration and consultation with the board, Choi said, his gaze moving between them, we've decided that the new supervising manager of the East Asia division will be. Jessica's phone vibrated violently in her pocket. Then Moojin's. Then both their phones started ringing simultaneously, the shrill sound cutting through the tension. Choi frowned. I thought I said no interruptions. His own phone lit up. Then Sandra's. Within seconds, all 4 phones were buzzing, ringing, lighting up with notifications. Sandra grabbed hers first, her face going pale as she read the screen. Sir, we have a situation. What kind of situation? Choi demanded. Kim Industries just went public with allegations of corporate espionage. They're claiming someone from our company leaked their proprietary information to their main competitor. Sandra's eyes were wide. They're threatening a lawsuit. They've already pulled their account. The blood drained from Jessica's face. Kim Industries, the account she and Moojin had been working on together. Last night, when they'd been alone in the office. That's impossible, Moojin said, standing abruptly. We had those files encrypted, and only Jessica and I had access. He stopped, the implication hanging in the air. Everyone turned to look at them. Where were you both last night? Choi asked slowly, his eyes narrowing. The security logs show you were the last 2 people in the building. You left separately, nearly an hour apart. Jessica's mouth went dry. They wanted to know what they'd been doing, why they'd stayed so late, why they'd been alone together with sensitive files when a massive breach occurred. She met Moojin's eyes across the desk, saw her own panic reflected there. If they told the truth about what they'd actually been doing, their careers were over. If they lied and the truth came out later, their careers were over. And one of them might be about to take the fall for corporate espionage.
Well,
Choi's voice cut through the silence like a blade. I'm waiting for an explanation. If there's one thing Jessica and Moojin learned, it's this. Sometimes the line between rivalry and desire is thinner than a single heartbeat, and crossing it can cost you everything. Careers, reputations, trust. Once broken, they never return the same. But some stories don't end when the scandal begins. Sometimes, that's where the real love story starts. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode of cross-cultural romance, tension, and unforgettable drama here on Afro Asia Diaries. Tell us in the comments, would you risk your career for love?